All right, class, let's think about this for a second. There's a rule in history, and it's almost always true. Great civilizations rise, and then, eventually, they fall. They disappear. Their languages, their beliefs, their cities, they just become footnotes in a textbook. But what if a civilization just didn't? For over 2,500 years, one civilization, Iran, has been conquered again and again. And yet, somehow, it not only survived, it did something that pretty much defies all the rules of history. So, how did they pull it off? How did they master this art of survival? That's what we're going to break down in this review session. We'll start with the paradox itself, look at the foundations they built, walk through the major tests they faced, see how they forged a new identity, and finally, tie it all together. So let's dive right into section 1, the Iranian paradox. Like I said, the standard playbook is that when a civilization gets conquered, its culture gets paved over. It becomes a relic. But Iran is the exception that breaks the rule. And this gets us to the central question for today, the one you really need to think about. How does a place that was invaded by the Greeks, the Arabs, the Turks, and the Mongols not just hang on, but somehow culturally absorb its conquerors? How did a civilization that, by all rights, should have vanished, manage to turn its invaders into patrons of its own culture? That is the mystery we're unpacking today. The answer to that mystery, the real key, was put in place right at the very beginning. This takes us to section 2, the foundation of resilience. It all started with Iran's first great empire, the Achaemenids. And they didn't just build an empire, they created a blueprint for how to endure. Now look at this timeline. What you should notice here is the stability, the long, powerful reigns of guys like Cyrus the Great and Darius I. This wasn't just about grabbing more land. No, this was about building a deep, shared identity. Darius, for example, he set up this incredible system of provinces, built roads. He created the software for a unified empire that would outlast the hardware of any single king. And this philosophy is really the secret sauce. When Cyrus the Great took Babylon, he did something radical. He didn't force everyone to worship his gods. Instead, he basically said, keep your gods, keep your traditions. This idea, captured on the famous Cyrus cylinder, was brilliant. It created a model where you could be part of this huge Persian Empire without having to give up who you were. It was a model of absorption, not annihilation. Remember that. Okay, so you've built this incredibly resilient foundation. But you know it's going to be tested, right? And it was, big time. So let's move to section 3 and look at the first 2 huge challenges and see how this pattern of cultural absorption really started to kick in. First up, Alexander the Great. A military genius, no doubt. He rolled over the Persian Empire, and on paper, that should have been game over. But then, a really funny thing started to happen. The deeper Alexander went into Persia, the more Persia seemed to get into him. He started dressing like a Persian king, he adopted their fancy court rituals, he even told his top generals to marry Persian noblewomen. The conqueror was being culturally conquered. Okay, now fast forward a few hundred years to this second great test, the Arab conquest. This one was even bigger because it was both a political and a religious takeover. Iran converted to Islam, sure, but here's the crazy part. It never became Arab. Instead, these highly skilled Persian bureaucrats basically became the guys who ran the new Islamic empire. And while Arabic was the language of the Quran, the Persian language itself made this incredible comeback, especially with the epic poem The Shahnameh, which is basically Iran's national story. It preserved their history and identity for all time. Now, if the Greeks and Arabs were tough tests, the Mongol invasion, that was the final exam from hell. This was a challenge so unbelievably brutal, it should have been the end, period. I mean, it is really hard to overstate how devastating this was. Genghis Khan's armies didn't just conquer, they annihilated. Entire massive cities were literally wiped off the map. They destroyed the irrigation systems that had existed for centuries, turning farmland into desert. This wasn't just losing a war, this was a civilization-level extinction event. And yet, and this part is just mind-blowing, the pattern repeated itself. It's almost unbelievable. After a couple of generations, the Mongol rulers of Persia converted to Islam. Then they started acting less like Mongol warlords and more like Persian kings. They started paying for beautiful art, gorgeous poetry, and stunning mosques. The very culture they had nearly erased ended up seducing and absorbing them completely. So we've seen how Iran's survival was like a cultural judo move, using the conqueror's own weight against them. But that's only half the story. resilience also comes from actively building your own unique identity, kind of like a cultural fortress. And this brings us to the Safavid dynasty. Their game-changing move was all about religion. In 1501, the Safavids declared that a specific branch of Islam, Twelver Shia Islam, was now the official state religion. Now, you have to understand, this was a radical move because most people in the region at the time were actually Sunni Muslims. So why on earth would they do that? Well, just look at their neighbors. To the west, you had the massive, powerful Sunni Ottoman Empire. To the east, more Sunni states. By making Shia Islam their official brand, the Safavids drew a massive line in the sand. It made Iran religiously and culturally distinct from all its powerful rivals. It forged a new, uniquely Iranian national identity hardened by faith.
Okay, let's bring it all home. Section 6, the unbreakable thread. If you're studying for the exam, this is the part where you really want to pay attention. Let's synthesize everything we've talked about.
So let's just run down the scorecard. Who really won in the long run? Politically, yeah, Iran lost a lot of battles. But culturally, the Greeks started acting Persian. The Arabs needed Persian know-how to run their empire. And even the terrifying Mongols ended up becoming huge fans of Persian art. One after another, the conquerors were just pulled in. And here it is. This is the single most important sentence for you to remember. Iran's secret to survival wasn't about having the biggest army. It was about having a cultural gravity so powerful, so deep, that it could pull even the most brutal conquerors into its orbit, and, over time, make them part of the Iranian story. So this whole incredible story leaves us with a much bigger question, one to really chew on. We know empires are fragile, they come and go. But what about a culture? What are the ingredients that allow a people's ideas, their stories, their very identity to survive everything thrown at them and become, well, basically immortal?